Okay, as we finished the last video, basically we were getting ready to start with the functions of bile, which is produced by our liver, but the liver is going to store it in our gallbladder. So the major function, digestive function of the gallbladder is to store and concentrate the bile. We're talking anywhere from about 5 to 20, 25 times of concentration of the bile. So if you've had your gallbladder removed, you still produce bile. The function of bile is basically to emulsify our fats, which really kind of means taking large fat globules and making it into microscopic little tiny fat droplets, so that again it can cross over the wall of the lumen of the vessel. Now, the bile that is produced by the liver is a lot less concentrated than that leaves the gallbladder. So it is much more efficient if we do possess our gallbladder because we're getting a big dose of bile. So in other words, when we eat that large meal, we get a contraction that is going to force the bile out of the gallbladder. So we get a lot of bile coming out during that meal instead of just a constant drip 24/7. But also then the bile is much more concentrated coming out of a gallbladder instead of straight out of the liver. And that really gets up to our gallbladder and the functions in the duodenum. Now I'm going to remove some of this just so you can see a little better. But the jejunum, this is the next region, or the second region of the small intestine. The main thing I'd like you to know for its function is here's where we're going to absorb our nutrient molecules. So when we're talking about our carbs, our sugars, our fats, breaking it down, and our lipids into glycerols and fatty acids, triglycerides, our proteins, breaking it down into small proteins or amino acids. So when I'm talking about absorbing our nutrients, I'm talking about our fuel molecules. The fuel molecules that we convert those bonds into ATP molecules to utilize in cellular respiration. Now, the jejunum looks a lot different than the duodenum if you look at it histologically or even at a macroscopic level of the organ. When you look at the jejunum, it has, extending into the lumen of this tube, these little projections, kind of like finger-like projections that we call villi. Now the villi here are actually covered with little tiny microscopic structures that we call microvilli. So it's between these villi and the microvilli that it really increases the surface area. So when the food's going through this tube, it can get in between these things and have lots of access to the bloodstream. So the blood vessels that surround this area run down into the individual villi and provide easy access into the circulatory once we get the molecules physically broken down small enough. And so the jejunum in a cross section, or even if you was to remove intestines, and no matter what creature you remove it from, what mammal you remove it from, you can see usually this unique nature to the absorbing capabilities of the jejunum. Now, when we look, here's where, and I say, the majority of nutrient absorption takes place. The ileum is still going to be involved with absorbing the nutrients also, but it's usually the completion. So it's really these two regions that knock out almost all the nutrients that we can get out of our food and liquid materials that we ingest. Now, one of the things that's nice is that these things are also capable of some unique contractions. Similar to the peristaltic contractions that we talked about with the esophagus, we get this action, it can propel it forward, but it can also do a reverse contraction and propel it backward. And so it's this back and forth movement of the food material going across the jejunum and the ileum that we call pendular movements. And pendular movements, just like a pendulum on an old grandfather clock, bring it back and forth. Well, as we bring that back and forth, this vessel, this is going to, again, allow the maximum efficient amount of molecules to be absorbed from the inside of this tube in through the wall into the circulatory system. And then, of course, it's our bloodstream and our circulatory that's going to transport all of these nutrients out to the cells that are in dire need of these supplies. So pendular movements are back and forth movements that really increase our efficiency at absorbing all of the nutrients out of it. Now, to get rid of this again, when we look, the next structure is known as our large intestine. There's a lot of regions to this one, and I'd like you to know the names of those. First of all, the ileum dumps here in this pouch area. So this is the end of the ileum coming here. You can't see it on this side, but this is the end of it right there is the ileocecal valve. That ileocecal valve is leaves below this a pouch area. And so we call that the cecum or the cecal pouch. And this pouch has attached to it, and again, I have to remove it here. So let me pull out the stomach. And if you look right behind here, see the cecal pouch, you can see here's the ileum running in. But see, there's another finger-like projection. So if you flip it right around here, you can see. So right here in this lower right-hand quadrant of your pelvic region, abdominal pelvic region, you get the appendix. Now, the appendix is really not a typical part of the pathway here. But I would like you to know this one coming off of the cecum, just because it's important, again, for it's quite common for this thing to become so inflamed that it has to be removed from the body. The appendix, there's all kinds of views on it. We typically consider it vestigial, meaning it's shriveled up and shrank in size to the point it's no longer really performing much of a function. It may have had more of a function back before we became quite so carnivorous and ate a lot more fruit and vegetable matter. It also seems to have, it harbors a high number of white blood cells, so it may actually be beneficial in our immune systems. But there's all kinds of controversies and further understandings of maybe where our functions of our appendix came from. Now, following the cecum, we have what's known as the ascending colon, and it's where it begins its upward journey. Then it goes across the body from the right to the left, and we call that the transverse colon. Then it's going to take a dive down, and you can see then it's going to head down the descending colon. Then it's going to do a little curve, and that curve, just like the curve, say a population study, a sigmoid curve, is known as the sigmoid colon. And then that's going to then terminate down to the rectum, the anal canal. And the end of the anal canal we know as the anus. So, now, what I would like you to, and I guess I didn't show you all this. So you have the cecum, the appendix I showed you, ascending, transverse, descending. Then it gets down here and it does this S-shaped curve going down on in. And I don't think this model shows the rectum and anal canal very good. Now, you can see where this S-shaped curve here starts with the sigmoid colon. Well, about right here. Now, normally right behind that bladder and stuff, you're going to, oh wait, that's not bladder, that's the uterus and fallopian tubes and ovaries.
Did you thought?
Sorry, I assumed, I didn't know. I didn't assume the sex there. But anyway, the rectum, it usually has these parallel ridges or folds that helps distinguish the tissue, which you can't really see in this model here. But the main thing I really want you to know is these are the regions, but I also want you to know what is the overall function of the large intestines. Large intestine. Don't need an S on it. Now, the overall major function is to do a couple things. One is to resorb all the water that's been contributed. Remember, the saliva, mainly water, liter and a half of saliva added a day. The pancreatic juice, liver, the bile from the liver, which has been stored in the gallbladder, all these materials and secretions have a water-based nature to it. So we would literally lose liters and liters of water if we didn't resorb that water back into the system with the large intestine. So one of the important things is to keep that material in the large intestine a suitable amount of time. If it's not kept in there long enough, we get watery stools or diarrhea. If we keep it in there too long because you didn't have a proper bowel movement for a day or two, you're going to take too much water out and put it back in the circulatory system, and that resorption is going to result in a hard, dry, difficult to pass stool, and we refer to that as being constipated. We still have to absorb, though, a couple more materials here. We got our nutrient molecules out in the jejunum and the ileum, but we still have a lot of our vitamins need to be absorbed, and a lot of our minerals have to be absorbed. And so this is another very important function of our large intestine, is to remove those materials out of the GI tract and put it into and absorb it into the circulatory system, into the bloodstream, so it can be transported around to all the individual cells. With that, I'll talk about the occurrence of bowel movement in another lecture. You guys have a great day.